In this video, I want to introduce you to the concept in C++ of exceptions. And so here I've entitled this particular video Exception Basics because that's what I want to give you is just the foundation for what exceptions are and how you're going to use them and just a little bit about the terminology. Now first of all, understand that you're going to write a bunch of code to build a program to provide some cool functionality. Now all the code that you write should run flawlessly. There shouldn't be any errors, there shouldn't be any problems, and I guess in your dreams that'll happen, but there are going to be exceptions to this idea. Some of the code that you write won't quite run flawlessly, and there is another word for exceptions, and that is errors. Now errors can take place in a number of different forms. You let your logic get out of whack and things exceed limits. You try to open files that for some reason won't open, or they've been moved. All kind of things can cause errors. Now when we're talking about exceptions, we are referring to code that does not run as expected. It's an exception to the rule of properly running code. Alright? Now exceptions occur unexpectedly. Alright? That's why they're exceptions. But we should expect them. It's kind of like the old politician's line, I can't remember who it was. It was Dan Quayle or somebody like that. If you remember who that is, don't worry about it if you don't. But they said, we'll be ready for the unexpected if it should happen when we least expect it, but we'll be ready for it. It was something like that. It's that circular stuff that you so often hear from politicians. But that is exactly what we're doing here. We're pretty confident that we've written perfect code, and if you've ever noticed when you write a line of code and it throws an error, it always kind of shocks you, right? What? And you always think there's something wrong with the computer or something's wrong with the universe or something, but as it turns out, yes, you've coded something up incorrectly. So exceptions are what we use to deal with unexpected actions, results that come from our program. Now let me give you a little lingo or terminology that you're going to see concerning exceptions, and you just need to be aware of these. First of all, now the code that encounters an error is going to throw an exception. Okay? It's going to raise an error, but in these terminologies you normally hear it that we're going to throw an exception. Now we can manually throw an exception. I'll show you that later on in the examples. The code that deals with the exception or the error that occurred catches what is thrown. Alright, so just think about a little baseball in a glove. Okay, now when we're talking about throwing and catching an exception, we're looking for something to occur, an error, and we usually can guess what section of code fairly reliably that might have a problem. Now once an error gets thrown, or once an exception gets thrown, or it bubbles up, or whatever you want to call it, an error takes place, your normal step-by-step code execution gets interrupted. Now really what happens is your computer kind of freaks out, your program freaks out and says, oh no, wait a minute, here's a problem and I don't know what to do with it. And it does something we call bubbling up. It kind of bubbles up through whatever called that function to whatever called that function to whatever called that function, and it's looking for somebody to handle this odd thing that happened. Okay, and so the condition is usually, if it's gracefully handled, is thrown to a handler. Notice there's that word throw again. The handler catches it, and the handler should have some code to deal with the exception. Now how do we deal with an exception? Well, we'll tell the user, hey, this file has not been found. You want to check the name that you typed in, or give me a different location. Or it's going to tell you, oh, wait a minute, you're out of stock on this, you can't divide by 0. Those kinds of things. All right, now the way we implement exceptions in C++ is using a try-catch block. Alright, now this is the exception version of if statements. Now we're basically going to write the code that we think might throw an error into a try section, and really what we're saying is if you have any errors here, then do something. And the catch is really kind of the exception version of the then portion of an if-then statement. If this happens, then do this. Try says, try this code. If you have an error and an error is thrown, then catch it in the catch section. Alright, now here's what you need to understand. Uncaught exceptions. Exceptions or errors that happen that keep bubbling up and nothing catches them, nothing deals with them, it doesn't find a catch for them, they will terminate the program. And by terminating the program means the program stops, it's ugly, the user has to restart the program, it usually throws a bunch of gibberish up on the screen, and it bothers everybody. Now here's the last thing I want to tell you in this particular video. Beware the murky world of exception handling. Now I could say that a more positive way, but I think this one got your attention a little better. The more positive way to say this is there's a lot of different ways to handle exceptions, especially in C++. There's a lot of ways to do a lot of things in C++, okay? Now when you get into this, and you'll see I'm going to throw some examples at you in a separate movie, okay? But when we get to that video, it'll probably be entitled Exception Example, okay? But there's a lot of different ways to throw these, and this is a good example of a place where I would strongly recommend you, outside the course of this kind of basic introductory C++ course, to jump out there and do some reading and some digging on exceptions, and you kind of learn a style that you like, kind of dig into what can be done, how many different ways it can be done, and so forth. Okay, so anyway, that's the basics on exceptions, and in the next 2 or 3 videos we'll dig into this a little deeper.